Welcome, everybody. Welcome to a Sunday edition of the Law of Self-Defense show. I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branker for the Law of Self-Defense. My applause button is not working. I don't know why, so I have to applaud myself. Thank you all for coming and spending some of your Sunday with me today. It's greatly appreciated. And of course, as advertised, George Stephanopoulos. I forgot to note the date of that. Let's see if I can pull that up real quick. It would have been within the year, December 2nd, 2021. So just a couple of months after the October 21st, 2021 shooting of Helena Hutchins on the set of Rust by Alec Baldwin. He appeared on the show with George Stephanopoulos on ABC News to be interviewed about his view of that event. I've taken that interview and I've kind of broken it up to its components that are relevant for us. A lot of it was fluff. So I've cut all that out. It's about half the length of the initial interview, but we'll be here probably for the same duration as the interview because, of course, I have things to say about all of this. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Let me do this real quick. And we'll be able to go ahead and start the formal launch of today's show in just 3, 2, 1. Actually, let me fix Twitter here. Make sure this is working correctly. And it looks like it is. All right. So let's go ahead and start. All right. So I'm hoping everybody can hear me okay. People in the chat. And if someone in the Law Self-Defense chat can let me know if the audio sounds good to them, that would be appreciated. We are streaming to YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, and of course to the Law Self-Defense dashboard, which is where Law Self-Defense members can live stream the show and comment in chat, and that is where I will address questions and comments. Today's show is brought to us by none other than CCW Safe, a provider of self-defense legal services, what many people mistakenly call self-defense insurance. They promise to pay your legal expenses and cover you if you're involved in the use of force event and you're one of their members, of course. And they do much more than that too. They provide they parachute in an investigative team. They have attorney Don West as your national trial counsel to help advise on your case. He, of course, was one of the defense attorneys for George Zimmerman. Just a great team over there. I do a lot of partnering with them. Not only that, but they're my choice. They're the ones I trust. I'm a member of CCW Safe. My wife is a member of CCW Safe. If you'd like to learn why they're the ones I trust, you just point your browser to lawofselfdefense.com/trust. I will type that in the browser tab right now so you have it for later. Lawofselfdefense.com/trust. I explain why I think they are the best choice for me and perhaps the best choice for you. And you'll get a 10% discount code for my mic is screwing up. Okay, let me try. See what's happening there. Okay, now let's try it again. Let me know if you're one of the Law Self-Defense members. Let me know if the audio is any better. Yeah, I know it's when I turn the microphone back on, it leaves me muted, but that should be fixed. Yes, that should be fixed now. But I just want to make sure the audio is not choppy. Yep, I know. It was muted for a minute. You don't have to leave me the mute notifications. I got that fixed. Okay, much better. Oh, I hate all this stuff. All right, so anyway, CCW Safe, lawofselfdefense.com/trust, and you'll get a 10% discount code for when you become a member of CCW Safe. Check them out. They're a good team of people over there. All right. So before I jump into my edited and abridged version of the Alec Baldwin, George Stephanopoulos interview, I want to provide some foundation. Things that, by the way, George Stephanopoulos did not do. For example, we can take a look at the actual charges that Baldwin is facing. Let me make this a little bigger for everyone. Whoops. It's this. I want it to make bigger. Okay, so of course Baldwin was charged, and then the charges were dropped, and now he's been indicted again, effective just last month, almost exactly a month ago, 5 weeks ago, on charges of involuntary manslaughter. Now, there's two paths to get to involuntary manslaughter under New Mexico law. One of them is this first one, involuntary manslaughter premised on negligent use of a firearm. The other is involuntary manslaughter without due caution or circumspection. So the two ways to get to involuntary manslaughter, where everyone agrees you didn't intend to hurt anybody. The first is if you were engaged in an unlawful act, not a felony. The underlying act is not a felony, but it's a crime. It's a misdemeanor, and someone dies as a result. Now, if it were a felony, you'd be charged with felony murder. But if it's not a felony, an underlying felony, it's only a misdemeanor, it's an unlawful act, somebody dies, that's one way to get to involuntary manslaughter. And here, the state of New Mexico is saying that unlawful act is the crime of negligent use of a deadly weapon. So that's a misdemeanor under New Mexico statute 30-7-4. They're saying he was handling the revolver in a negligent manner. That's an independent crime under New Mexico law. And that gets you to the path of involuntary manslaughter based on an unlawful act. But there's another way to get to involuntary manslaughter, and that's where you're acting lawfully. Oops. That's where you're acting. It's my dad calling. That's where you're acting lawfully and someone dies, but you were acting lawfully without due care and circumspection. And this envisions a circumstance in which you're engaged in some kind of inherently dangerous activity. So you're using explosives, you're working with dangerous chemicals, you're working with poisons, or you're handling firearms. Firearms are inherently dangerous instruments. So here the state is basically saying, hey, even if you don't believe he was committing the crime of negligent handling of a firearm, even if you believe he was acting lawfully, he was doing it without due care and circumspection. And really, it all comes down to his physical handling of the gun. The failure to confirm that the gun was not loaded with live bullets, personally ensured that, Alec Baldwin, and the pointing of the gun directly at Helena Hutchins, those are the acts that the state is arguing were either criminally negligent handling of a firearm or lawful conduct, but lacking due care and circumspection when we're dealing with something inherently dangerous. So that's what he's charged with. Now, we'll hear a lot from Alec Baldwin in this interview saying basically, well, someone surely is responsible for this terrible tragedy. It's just not me. It's not my job to make sure that the gun doesn't have live ammo in it. Of course, that skips the second concern, which is that he pointed the gun directly at Helena Hutchins. So there's two problems here. Live ammo was in the gun. He didn't ensure there was no live ammo in the gun, and he pointed the gun directly at Helena Hutchins. Whenever he says, I'm not responsible for what happened, he only references the ammo question. But of course, he is responsible for pointing what he knew to be a real gun at Helena Hutchins. And we know he knew it to be a real gun because he says so in his police interview shortly after the shooting occurs on October 21st. By the way, if he hadn't known it was a real gun, if the gun had gone off and he'd said, Holy cow, I thought this was an inert prop. I didn't know it was capable of firing a bullet. That would have been a perfect legal defense, because then he wouldn't have known he needed to use due care and circumspection. He wouldn't have known he was handling a real gun, an inherently dangerous instrument. But unfortunately, when he agreed to speak to the police for an hour plus without a lawyer present, he just told the investigators on recording that he knew that was a real gun. And if he knows it's a real gun, he knows it's capable of firing a bullet. He knows he's pointing a real gun at Helena Hutchins. He knows he did not personally ensure there was no live ammo in the gun. But whenever he says it's not my responsibility, it's someone else's responsibility, it's always helpful, I think, to take a look for what the actual rules are for actors. And this can be found in the SAG, Screen Actors Guild, AFTRA handbook on safety bulletins, which covers tons of stuff, covers helicopters, all kinds of stuff you can imagine. And as you might think, a big part of it has to do with guns and safety generally. So here's one highlighted portion I pulled out just for the purposes of today's show. As an actor, you are ultimately responsible for your own safety and the safety of your fellow cast members. So safety is not somebody else's job. Safety is everybody's job, including the actors, not just the crew. This continues. Production, management, and crew are responsible for creating and maintaining safe conditions, but it is your right and responsibility to double check the setup to ensure your own safety and, of course, the safety of others. That means double check the gun in this context, folks. More from SAG-AFTRA. See if I can make this bigger. More specific now to firearms. General safe use and handling of firearms. Refrain from pointing a firearm at anyone, including yourself. Remember that any object at which you point a firearm could be destroyed. Never place your finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot. And Baldwin will swear that he didn't have his finger on the trigger, but of course we've all seen the screenshots of him rehearsing with the pistol in that church that day, shortly before the shooting occurred, where he repeatedly has his finger on the trigger. Never lay your firearm or leave it unattended. Of course, that's not relevant here. All right, those are the highlights I wanted to hit on for purposes of today's show. And Alec Baldwin has done something like 75 movies. He's been in tons of movies in which he was handling guns. He's been doing this his entire adult life, decades of acting experience. And every time a gun was involved, he received training on safe handling of that gun. Dozens and dozens and dozens of times. So he can't claim ignorance. And we'll hear in this interview, there's clips from other actors, George Clooney in particular, saying, hey, I'm an actor, I'm in movies and TV, and every time I have to handle a gun, I check it personally to make sure there's no live ammo in it. So, with that out of the way, here it is. Let me pull up the actual interview. See if I can make myself even a little smaller. So again, in an effort to avoid a copyright strike by Disney, I've chopped up this interview. It's kept in its proper sequence. All the pieces are in their proper sequence. But I cut out all the fluff, and I just kept in the little 1 minute, 2 minute sections that I thought were relevant, and I put freeze frames in between the relevant sections. So that's what you should expect. That's how we'll proceed through the show here. And by the way, folks, so we will, of course, address questions and comments throughout the show, but only from our Law of Self-Defense members on our Law of Self-Defense dashboard. The good news is any of you can become a member right now for 99 cents, folks. Can't make it hardly any cheaper than that. 99 cents gets you a 2-week trial membership with Law of Self-Defense. You'll be immediately emailed how to access the live chat on our member dashboard, where you can participate in the chat, put your questions and comments in. After the 2-week trial, it's still dirt cheap to be a Law of Self-Defense member. It's only about 30 cents a day, less than $10 a month, folks, to get this kind of content, apparently 7 days a week, at least this week. But at least you can try it out for 2 weeks for 99 cents at lawofselfdefense.com/trial. By the way, the trial is expected to last about 2 weeks, so this trial membership would cover you for the whole trial. lawofselfdefense.com/trial. All right. Now to the interview.
Alec, thank you for doing this.
Why did it stop? Okay. I swear. I swear. All right. Let me try it again. I swear. Okay, it looks like it's working now. Let me try again.
Alec, thank you for doing this. You haven't said much in public since that tragic accident. Why speak out now? Alec, thank you for doing this 1,000 times. Alec, thank you for doing this. You haven't said much in public since that tragic accident. Why speak out now?
Okay, first pause. Was it an accident? Because accident is actually a legal term of art. Accident is when you genuinely had no responsibility for the bad outcome. It was completely unforeseeable. So the example I often use is you visit your elderly aunt and she asks you to move a heavy bureau from one side of her apartment to the other. You're happy to do that. You move the heavy bureau, you put it down, unbeknownst to you, unforeseeable to you, the floor joists are rotten from termites, and the bureau crashes through the floor and kills the old lady in the apartment below. That's a legal accident. And for a genuine accident, there is no criminal or civil liability. That's different than being negligent, where you should have known that you were creating a risk of harm, or recklessness, where you did know you were creating a risk of harm. You didn't desire the outcome, but you knew you were creating the risk. Like when you're drunk driving home from the bar, you know you don't want to run anybody over, but you know you're creating a risk, an unjustified risk of running someone over and killing them. If you then do that, well, you've killed recklessly. That's involuntary manslaughter, which is what we're dealing with here, the reckless handling of this firearm. So it's not an accident. Or certainly the state is alleging it's not an accident. When you point a gun at somebody, and it's incontrovertible that he pointed the gun at Helena Hutchins because he shot her, you know you're creating a risk of their death or serious bodily injury. And that could be justified if it were, say, self-defense, but there's no justification here for this act. Continuing.
I think the big question, and the one you must have asked yourself 1,000 times, how could this have happened?
Well, there's two things I want to say about that. One is that when I talk about this, my concern is that I don't sound like I'm the victim. Because there is a victim. There's a woman who died, and my friend got shot.
So there is a victim, right? Helena Hutchins, who was killed by the bullet fired by Alec Baldwin, and Joel Souza, one of the directors, I guess, or producer, must have been a director, who got the bullet passed through Helena Hutchins and hit him in the arm. So two people, one death, one serious bodily injury, but he's all very passive voice. It happened. It just happened, like some kind of miracle happened, some kind of unforeseeable accident happened. It happened because he pointed a gun at another human being. That's why it happened. And he protests too much, right? He keeps saying, I don't want to be seen as a victim. I don't want to be seen as a victim. But how's he actually presenting himself? As the victim of a unforeseeable tragic circumstance.
I want to make sure that I don't come across like I'm the victim, because we have two victims here.
Yeah, okay. Already discussed.
And the second thing is that all of what happened on that day leading up to this event was precipitated on one idea, and that is that Helena and I had something profound in common. And that is we both assumed the gun was empty, other than those, dummy rounds.
Okay. Does the law allow you to presume that a gun is empty? Is that what the rules of gun safety say? Just assume the gun is empty when you point it at another human being. No. And everyone knows guns can kill. He knows it's a real gun. He knows it has the potential to fire a live round. He knows if it fires a live round while he has it pointed at Helena Hutchins, she's likely to suffer death or serious bodily injury. You don't get to assume It's unloaded. You think if Alec Baldwin, if the scene called for him pressing that muzzle up against his head, he wouldn't have made sure there were no live rounds in it? Assumption doesn't allow you to escape reckless conduct.
I am a purely creative producer. My authorities as a producer are casting and script, which are actually married to the role of being a lead actor in a film.
So you're not the kind of producer who's looking at the line item of each budget.
No. There are basically two types of producers who are really in charge of production: people that raise the money and the people who spend the money. My consultations or approvals were completely about casting and about the script.
So here he's just trying to mitigate his civil liability for the civil suits that are flying around this case. Even at the time of this interview, there were already 2 suits filed and surely more to come. And he's trying to say, hey, I was listed as a producer, but really I had no authority to do anything. In fact, it's unquestionable that he was the single most powerful person on the set of Rust. They only had money because he was attached to the movie. That's it. Anything he said goes. And all these other people are acting as his agents. So he's responsible for their conduct, their decisions, and omissions in the course of the jobs they're doing for him.
On the 12th, I had a safety demonstration with Hannah Reed, the armorer.
So he's saying now that morning he had a safety demonstration. But what he's actually going to describe has nothing to do with safety.
24-year-old Hannah Gutierrez Reed, seen here in...
Boy, how does she look different in court now than this?
Photos by the dailymail.com, was hired as the film's armorer, in charge of all weapons on set. The daughter of a famous Hollywood armorer, Rust was only her second film in this role.
Her dad, of course, being Fel Reed. Oh, so this was only her second role, as she'd had one gig before as head armorer. This was her second, and it was a part-time gig because the other part of her time was to be an assistant props manager.
Did you think she was up to the job?
I assumed because she was there and she was hired, she was up for the job.
And nothing she did raised any red flags with you?
No.
Nothing she did raised any red flags with you. Well, that's not... We're talking about your liability here. But of course, he just wants to talk about Helena Hutchins. He spends a lot of this interview, again, talking about where did the live round come from? Where did the live round come from? He never wants to talk about why he didn't check the gun in his hand and why he pointed it directly at Helena Hutchins.
This training course you do, what did she tell you?
This is the supposed safety course.
She said things like, remember, this is a blank round, so you have to create the discharge yourself because there's no projectile. So if you shot the gun, you go bang. When we roll the camera, you got to go bang and have the gun snap back. You have to create that. She would give you little tips about firing. And she'd say to you, when we're done, point the gun down. When we're done, you give the gun to me or to Halls, only those two people.
Dave Halls was Rust's assistant director.
So the experts I talked to, including my friend Adam Baldwin, who has his own experience as a Hollywood and TV actor, and certainly what the defense is alleging in this trial, is that, and they're going to bring in an expert to testify about this, the assistant director never handles the firearm. Ever. That's what the armorer is for. You don't hand it from the armorer to the assistant director, then the assistant director to the actor, because how would the armorer know who the assistant director is going to give it to? You can't have this lengthy chain of custody of a firearm.
If I'm holding the gun and they say cut, I then hand the gun to Halls if she's not there.
Yeah, why Halls, not Hannah? Some people have said that only the armorer should be handling it.
No. That's inaccurate. Meaning in the protocols of the business, meaning Hannah would to hand me the gun 99% of the time. Whatever, the preponderance of the time. But when we would say cut, if Hannah was away from the set, I would hand Halls the gun.
Why was Hannah away from the set?
Hannah Gutierrez Reed had a dual role on set, armorer, and she was also the assistant prop master for the film. One of the things her attorney has said is that she was hired for 2 positions on the film and therefore was stretched in an inappropriate way. Did she raise any of those concerns with you?
No, I assume that everyone who's shooting a lower budget film is stretched, myself included. And I got no complaints from her or the prop department. I'm not sitting there when I'm getting dressed and ready to go do a scene saying, oh my God, the prop woman seemed very harried today. I didn't get a sense of that from any of the people on the film. The first time I heard that there was any problem with anybody in the crew of the film was when Luber said, well, we have some issues here.
Lane.
So, of course, it's a low budget film, right? Nobody's getting everything they want, but the one place you cannot cut corners is safety, especially safety in the context of a deadly force threat, which is what these real guns are.
Lane Looper, the first camera assistant, would email production managers a resignation letter later that night, citing safety concerns. Quote, during the filming of gunfights on this job, things are often played very fast and loose. So far, there have been 2 accidental weapons discharges. He also wrote about concerns about reasonable rest and housing for local crew with long commutes to the set.
All right, but that's not a safety issue, right? He spoke explicitly to a safety issue. Does anyone believe that Alec Baldwin was unaware that there had been 2 accidental discharges on set? You don't think the whole set talked about it? Of course he knew. It's impossible to imagine that he didn't know.
So you had no sense from anyone on the set that people had been stretched to the point where safety was compromised?
No. I never heard one word about that. None.
Now, first of all, I don't believe that's true. Second of all, even if it is true, it doesn't matter. It's not relevant to his reckless conduct. Pointing a gun at another human being without ensuring that it did not have live rounds in it. If there had been no accidental discharges, it's still reckless conduct to point a gun at another human being without ensuring there are no live rounds in it.
Rust producers told ABC News Mr. Looper's allegations around budget and safety are patently false, which is not surprising, considering his job was to be a camera operator and he had absolutely nothing to do with or knowledge of safety protocols or budgets.
You know, first of all, it's hard to believe that anybody in the industry hasn't read the SAG-AFTRA safety bulletins. In fact, I think they're mandatory to be provided and taught. Second of all, do you need any kind of specialized training to know that when guns are going off unintentionally, that's a dangerous situation? Even if you had no reason to believe there could be a live round in the gun, the noise alone, he talks about that in his email. We're suffering hearing damage and tinnitus from these gun blasts without our hearing protection on, because that's not when the gun is supposed to go off.
Safety is always the #1 priority on our films.
But it wasn't. It wasn't, because this is a Western. There's guns everywhere, every scene. There's hundreds or thousands of rounds of blank ammo that are going to be discharged. And their armorer, it's her second gig as head armorer, and she's part-time.
When people say
that's not a top priority,
cutting costs, I don't say this with any judgment or any cynicism. Spielberg wants to save money. Tom Cruise wants to save money. Everybody who makes movies has a responsibility not to be reckless and careless with the money that you're given.
How about being reckless and careless with the gun you're holding? How about that, Alec Baldwin?
Those are men who make movies that cost $205 million. And I'm making movies that cost $5 million.
The question, though, is were costs being cut?
You don't get to have less safety because you're a low-budget film. You get to have less effects, less travel, less luxurious hotels, lesser quality food, lesser high-rank stars. But you don't get to legally compromise safety and not be held accountable if you recklessly kill somebody because you're on a low-budget film. By the way, I pulled up the New Mexico manslaughter statute. Here it is. There's nothing in here about carving out an exception for actors on a set. That does not exist. That is not a thing.
Cut at the expense of safety and security.
In my opinion, no, because I did not observe any safety or security issues at all in the time I was there.
He was the safety and security issue.
Thursday, October 21st, Baldwin posts a photo of himself in costume on Instagram. Back to in-person at the office. Blimey, it's exhausting. That morning, Looper and 6 other crew members walked off the set. Filming continued with a replacement camera crew.
So he knows the film crew has walked off the set. There's no way he could not know that. And you don't think he says, what the F is going on? What the F is going on? Our film crew just walked off the set. They had to scramble to get another film crew from Albuquerque to film that day. Is it not irresponsible of him not to ask why they're leaving and not know that they had safety concerns?
Scene 118 in the church was slated for after lunch.
And I said their safety concerns are not relevant to what he did because he pointed the gun at Helena Hutchins without checking to make sure it's unloaded. But he should have been even more aggressive about ensuring the gun was unloaded, knowing there were safety concerns by the crew.
Baldwin was preparing for his next scene, a shootout inside this wooden church. Set the scene right before that happened. You're sitting in a pew in the church.
Right.
What's the scene supposed to be?
The scene is the two guys are there who have got me, cornered, and they think I'm shot pretty bad, and I'm kind of wilting, and they have a gun, and the sound outside distracts them, and I then draw the gun cross-draw out of my holster, pull the gun up like that, and start to cock the pistol. Cut.
Okay.
I'm handed a gun, and someone.
Keep in mind, I talked about this yesterday. This is a blocking rehearsal. They're not filming. He's just going through the rough motions. They're trying to make sure that the cameras are going to capture that people are standing where they're supposed to be standing, for example, and the cameras are capturing them, and the lighting's going to be okay. Everybody knows where they're supposed to step. That's what blocking is. The actors moving from one position to another position and doing rough approximations of the physical movements that they'll be doing. There's no need to have a gun here for this. There's no need. There's no need for anything to be in the cylinder of that gun. Not dummy rounds, not blank rounds, nothing. There's no need to point the gun directly at Helena Hutchins. There's no need to cock the hammer. None of that is necessary here.
Someone declares, they said, this is a cold gun.
Dave Halls.
The first AD. In my year.
So keep in mind, there's 3 states, well, 4 states, unfortunately. 4 states the gun could be in, right? The cylinders could be completely empty, which on a single action revolver takes seconds to check. You just half cock the hammer, open the loading gate, spin the cylinder. It just free spins, and you can see through the cylinders, the chambers in the cylinder. You see clear through them. Nothing's in there. No brass at all. That's about as safe as you can make a gun, right? Maybe under that circumstance, you might be willing to point the gun at somebody, but certainly not until you've done that. And the moment that gun leaves your hand, comes back into your hand, you check it again. So that's one state, completely empty. The next state is there's dummy rounds in there, inert dummy rounds. They don't do anything. They just appear to be real bullets. And those are the ones that have a hole drilled in the side, or they have a spring or a ball bearing inside. You could shake them and hear it clanging around, rattling, or they're missing the primer. Those are inert. Those are harmless. And the way you ensure that's all that's in the gun is you take each one of those out. Now, if there's no primer, you can just do the cylinder spin again and just click, 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 click. There's no primers in the gun. If there's no primers, that's not a round that can be fired, even if it has a bullet on the front. Or you take them out, 6 rounds, they push out in a couple seconds, you look for the hole or you listen for the rattle, you load them back into the gun, and as long as that gun is still in your hand, you can be confident that it's only got dummy rounds in it. But if you don't check that there's only dummy rounds in it, you don't know what's in that gun. And the third state is there could be blanks in it. Now, blanks are cartridges that have a case, a primer, gunpowder, but they don't have a bullet. They're crimped at the front instead of a bullet. And of course, you can just visually see that there's no bullet on the front and ensure. Now, you may have to take them out of the cylinder to do that. In theory, I guess you could just kind of angle the gun and peer into the front of the cylinders and see that they're all crimped. Got to be careful of muzzle direction if you're going to do that. Or you take them out and you look at them in your hand and you see they're all crimped and you put them back into the gun and you know you have blanks. In this case, the gun was not supposed to be fired. There was no call for blanks. So there should have been no blanks in the gun. No rounds or primers should have been in the gun. And then the fourth state, of course, is there could be live ammo in the gun, which is obviously what happened here. Now, that should never happen, But the only way to know for certain that there's no live ammo in the gun is to check.
My years on the sets of film, hot gun meant that there was a charge in there, and cold gun meant there was nothing in there. When he's saying this is a cold gun, what he's saying to everybody on the set is, you can relax. The gun is empty.
So David Halls will testify, has said that he only did a very cursory examination of the gun, of the ammo in the gun. Now, of course, Hannah Gutierrez should have made a thorough inspection of the gun. We don't really know what happened between the gun leaving her hands and getting into Alec Baldwin's hands, because we have this intermediary of David Halls handling the gun. Now, do I think he loaded a live bullet in the gun? No, of course not. But might they have been rushing to film this set while the light was good, while they're on a low budget? They lost their film crew. They had to hire another film crew. They only have a certain number of days to film. They got to get this movie done. Can't have an incomplete movie. There's no time to waste. Hannah, come on, get me that gun. And she didn't have time to do an inspection. Now, a mature armorer would say, no, you're going to have to wait. Safety first. But a 24-year-old, least powerful person on the set, only her second job, she can't afford to make demands like that or have to back up a demand like that by, or I'll quit.
That's what cold gun means.
Well, cold gun means there's no charge in there. There could be dummy rounds.
A dummy round looks like a real bullet, but is completely inert. It contains no explosive charge.
Halls took a plea. David Halls took
And
a
you
plea.
were rehearsing that.
Sorry. Halls took a plea to negligent handling of a firearm. He was sentenced to 6 months unsupervised probation, basically.
Scene. Was it an actual rehearsal? There's some disagreement about that, whether it was a formal rehearsal at that time.
This is a marking rehearsal where I'm going to show her. She's standing next to the camera.
So that's what's also commonly referred to as a blocking rehearsal. So they're not speaking their lines, for example. They're not replicating what'll be filmed. So you do the blocking rehearsal, you check the cameras, the lights, the positions, making sure all that's right. Then you may do a rehearsal where they're actually speaking lines like you're going to be doing when you're filmed, and then you film it.
She's like this, you're me. She's got a monitor here. The camera is here filming that way. She takes a monitor that is his monitor, the operator, and turns it toward her. It swivels, and she says to me, hold the gun lower. Go to your right. Okay, right there. All right, do that. Now show it a little bit lower. And she's getting me to position the gun. Everything is in her direction. She's guiding me through how she wants me to hold the gun for this angle. And I draw the gun out, and I find a mark. I draw the gun out, I find a cut.
Now, is it a legal defense for Alec Baldwin to say, I was just doing what she told me to do? No. If she'd said, I need you to fire a bullet an inch past my head, and he did that and missed by an inch and shot her in the head, does he get a waiver of criminal liability because she told him to do that? No, he's responsible for what he does. He's not a robot. If he's creating an unjustified risk of death or serious bodily injury, you don't get a free pass because someone else told you to do it. You're responsible for what you do.
And what's really urgent is the gun wasn't meant to be fired in that angle.
So if you're shooting directly into the camera lens, you're not aiming.
I'm not shooting into the camera lens. I'm shooting just off.
Just off.
Right.
Yeah, at Helena Hutchins. So he's saving the camera. He doesn't want to endanger the camera with the muzzle. Heaven forbid, you would never do that. You aim a little off the camera at the cinematographer.
In her direction. I'm holding the gun where she told me to hold it, which ended up being aimed right in below her armpit.
I mean, other than the head, I guess, being shot armpit to armpit is about as bad as it gets, right across your chest, right? Both lungs and the heart.
But I was told, I don't know.
He doesn't know.
This was a completely incidental shot, an angle that may not have ended up in the film at all. But we kept doing this. And so then I said to her, now in this scene, I'm going to cock the gun. And I said, do you want to see that? And she said, yes. So I take the gun and I start to cock the gun. I'm not going to pull the trigger.
You think if you're pointing a gun at another human being and you're going to be cocking the hammer in a single action, that you wouldn't check to make sure. Again, nothing is supposed to happen. There's no flash. There's no reason to have anything in the gun in this blocking rehearsal.
Trigger. I said, do you see that? She goes, well, just cheat it down and tilt it down a little bit like that. And I cocked the gun. I go, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off. I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off.
Now, of course, many people, Ian Runkle, Brandon Herrera, others, many others, have done this testing of identical models of the single action revolver on the internet, where they show very clearly this can happen. So as you're pulling the hammer back, if you pull it back halfway, it gets caught in the half cock notch. That's the position where you can free spin the cylinder to load and unload the gun, check the chambers, all of that. The hammer can't fall from that position. It's mechanically impossible. So if you've pulled it that far, the only way to drop the hammer would be to pull it the rest of the way back and then use the trigger. If you pull it back less than halfway, it doesn't get caught in the halfway notch. But if you drop it from less than halfway, it doesn't have the momentum to fire the cartridge. So you can't just drop the hammer and have it fall and discharge the cartridge unless you have depressed the trigger. And again, we've seen the video clips. I've shown them many times of him rehearsing prior to this point in the church on the pew, whipping out the gun cross draw, pointing it, and every time he does that, his finger is on the trigger. And of course, the FBI tested the gun to the point of destruction and was never able to get it to replicate this discharging around, dropping the hammer without the trigger being depressed.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them. Never. That would.
But you would point a gun at them. That's acceptable. It's only unacceptable if you don't pull the trigger. And listen, you got to look at the balance of evidence, right? Sure, he can say he didn't pull the trigger. Is there counter evidence? Yeah, the gun just doesn't work that way. The hammer can't drop without the trigger being pulled.
That was the training that I had. You don't point a gun at me and pull the trigger.
But it's okay to point a gun at someone without ensuring there's no live rounds in the gun.
He told ABC News that he was watching and agrees that Alec did not pull the trigger and that his finger was outside the trigger guard.
Yeah, I wonder if David Halls is going to say that on the stand.
So you have this Colt 45, you just pulled.
The hammer as far back as I could without cocking the actual.
And you're holding onto the hammer.
I'm holding that. I'm just showing. I go, how about that? Does that work? Do you see that? Do you see that?
If you pull the hammer back to halfway, it gets caught in the half cock notch. If you pull it back all the way and let it go without depressing the trigger, it falls back to the half cock notch. The only way it falls all the way forward to discharge around is if the trigger is depressed.
She goes, yeah, that's good. I let go of the hammer. Bang, the gun goes off.
Okay.
Well, everyone is horrified. They're shocked. It's loud. They don't have their earplugs in. No one was. The gun was supposed to be empty. I was told, I was handed.
If it was supposed to be empty, how difficult would it have been to spin the cylinder and ensure that it was in fact empty? Empty means no dummy rounds either.
An empty gun. If there were cosmetic rounds, nothing with a charge at all, a flash round, nothing.
So he gets very ambiguous about the intended state of the gun. Was it empty? Was it supposed to have blanks in it that would flash and make smoke and noise? Was it supposed to have dummies in it?
Because remember, the idea that someone put a live bullet in the gun was not even in reality.
He loves talking about the bullet, where the bullet came from. To him, that's the only legal question here. Where did the bullet come from? Because that would have nothing to do with him. It also has nothing to do with why was the muzzle pointed at Helena Hutchins without ensuring that there was live ammo in the gun.
In the aftermath of the shooting, a torrent of criticism.
The first thing you do when you pick up that gun is you make sure that it's never pointed at anybody.
He should have known that an AD handing you a gun and saying it's cold isn't the same as several people showing you an empty gun.
If I were holding that gun, I would have checked it, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
And if Alec Baldwin, if the scene had called for him to hold that gun to his temple, you don't think he would have made sure there was no live rounds in that gun?
People said to me, I mean, I got countless people online saying, you idiot, you never point a gun at someone. Well, unless you're told it's empty, and it's the director of photography who's instructing you on the angle for a shot we're going to do.
You never do that, except in his unique, specific circumstances. Then it's okay.
And she and I had this thing in common where we both thought it was empty, and
they thought it was empty. How about you make sure it's empty? That's the only way to 100% eliminate the prospect of unintentionally causing someone else's death or serious bodily injury.
It wasn't. And that's not her responsibility. That's not my responsibility. Who's
okay? As an actor, you are ultimately responsible for your own safety and the safety of your fellow cast members. That's SAG-AFTRA. It is, by industry standards, everyone's responsibility, including yours.
Whose responsibility remains to be seen. But
well, there are some who say you're never supposed to point a gun at anyone on a set, no matter what.
Unless the person is the cinematographer who's directing me where to point the gun for her camera angle. That's exactly what happened.
I don't think he thought that George was going to ask him that question. He looks a little upset here. I hope he doesn't have a gun on him.
That day, I did exactly what I've done every day on that movie.
Which is what?
Which is that there's an armorer there, and that word is new to me. In the years I've been in this
What did you call it?
It was a prop guy or woman. And the prop.
He's been in 75 movies, many of which involved guns, and he's never, in all his decades acting, he's never heard the term, the job description, armorer. To him, armorer and prop person are interchangeable things.
The prop person would come, and sometimes they would insist on demonstrating for you and the camera crew. They take the gun. If it was a contemporary gun, they show you the chamber, they show you the clip. They say, the gun is cold.
That's a good way for no one to get killed, right? Everyone's looking at the gun. The actor and someone else is manipulating the gun to show him there's nothing in the chamber, there's nothing in the magazine, or if there's stuff in there, they're dummy rounds. Look, they rattle, they have a hole, there's no primer. Or if there's supposed to be blanks that are going to make noise and smoke, that they're crimped on the front.
And you look at it and go, thank you. And in the 40 years.
Sometimes that would happen. Not all the time.
Well, but no, sometimes they wouldn't demonstrate to me. Some insisted on demonstrating. They would.
How about that? Does that sound like safety? No, Mr. Baldwin, we have to do this. Otherwise, somebody could get killed.
Do the demonstration for everybody there right before we rolled the camera or rehearsed. Then there were others who they didn't do that because I trusted them to do the job. And again, this is not just me.
So he knows the way to do it that eliminates the risk of unintentional death or serious bodily injury. And he knows there's a way to do it that retains a risk of unintentional death or serious bodily injury. And he's treating them like equally viable and lawful options. They're not.
Me pointing a gun at somebody else, people pointing guns at me. I've gotten shot and killed in films before where people had to shoot a flash round at me, and I trusted them to do their job.
He trusted them to do their job. That's their job. That's their job. Except SAG-AFTRA says safety is everybody's job, including the actors.
And in the 40 years I've been in this business, all the way up until that day, I never had a problem.
How many times do you think you handled a gun in those 40 years?
Oh, God, I don't know. What amazes me is how many rounds of bullets do you believe have been fired on the sets of movies and TV shows in the last 75 years?
No idea.
Right. It couldn't be above 1 billion. You've had hundreds and hundreds of millions of bullets fired on the sets of films and TV shows, and 4 or 5 people were killed. Now, those deaths are tragic and abhorrent.
So this is not helpful to you, Alec Baldwin, because we have those millions or billions of rounds fired and only a handful of deaths resulting. Because 99.99% of the time, we're following the safety protocols of not pointing a gun at an actual person without ensuring there's no live rounds in the gun. And by the way, today's safety rules are a consequence of those handfuls of deaths. People died so we would have these safety rules. And yet you're blithely just saying, I assumed. It's someone else's responsibility. When I point a gun at another human being without ensuring personally that the gun in my hand doesn't have live rounds in it.
Every single time I'm handed a gun on the set, every time, Mark, they hand me a gun, I look at it, I open it, I show it to the person I'm pointing it to, we show it to the crew. Every single take, you hand it back to the armor when you're done, you do it again.
Right.
Everyone does it. Everybody knows it.
How do you respond to actors like George Clooney who say that every time they were handed a gun, they checked it themselves?
Well, there were a lot of people who felt it necessary to contribute some comment to the situation, which really didn't help the situation at all. You have if your protocol is you check the gun every time, well, good for you. Good for you. You know what I mean? I probably handled weapons as much as any other actor in films with an average career. Again, shooting or being shot by someone. And in that time, I had a protocol and it never let me down.
So you hear this kind of excuse all the time in negligence cases where, or even like drunk driving cases where someone finally runs somebody over after decades of drunk driving without being let down by their protocol. That doesn't relieve them of liability and criminal responsibility when it does let them down. There's a guaranteed way not to unintentionally shoot someone if you point a gun at them. That's to personally confirm there's no live ammo in the gun. That's the only way. Or just don't point the gun directly at them so that if the gun does go off, you miss. That's another way to do it. But when you combine the two, pointing the gun at another human being without ensuring there's no live ammo in it, it doesn't matter that nobody died the last 1,000 times you did it. All that matters is that somebody died this way. And by the way, so he basically called George Clooney a little bitch for adhering to safety protocol, to making sure that he always, every time that gun came into his hand, he checked again to make sure there was no live rounds in the gun. Alec Baldwin considers that an unhelpful contribution to the discussion. Wouldn't that, if everyone did that, wouldn't that be a nice change moving forward so we don't have any more dead Helena Hutchins, that everybody would follow the George Clooney protocol?
Why did you choose in your 40 years not to check the gun yourself?
What I was taught by someone years ago was
some unidentified person.
As I said, if I took a gun and I popped a clip out of a gun or I manipulated the chamber of a gun, they would take the gun away from me and redo it. The prop person said, don't do that, when I was young. And they'd say, one thing you would need to understand is we don't want the actor to be the last line of defense against a catastrophic breach of safety with the gun. My job, they told me, man or woman, my job is to make sure the gun is safe, and then I hand you the gun and I declare the gun safe. The crew's not relying on you to say that it's safe. They're relying on me to say that it's safe. When that person who was charged with that job handed me the weapon, I trusted them, and I never had a problem.
And this was from the beginning of your career?
From day one. There's one person that's supposed to make sure that what is in the gun is right and that what's wrong is not in the gun. One person has that responsibility to maintain the gun.
No, because they could have the responsibility and they can stand next to you moments before they put the gun in your hand and show you that the gun has no live rounds in it. So they're doing it, but you're personally confirming that when they're telling you there's no live rounds in the gun, it's true. That's an option besides simply taking their word for it and pointing a gun at another human being.
What is the actor's responsibility?
I'm so glad I pulled this up. What is the actor's responsibility, according to the Screen Actors Guild? As an actor, you are ultimately responsible for your own safety and the safety of your fellow cast members. That's the industry standard. Let's see what Alec has to say. Oh, sorry. I forgot to switch back. Let's see.
I guess that's a tough question because the actor's responsibility going this day forward is very different than it was the day before.
So Stephanopoulos had just asked him, you heard that. What is the actor's ability? And now he's answering this day forward. Well, now we know.
For that, yeah. Now I can't. First of all, I can't imagine I'd ever do a movie that had a gun in it again. And I can't. When you say what is the actor's responsibility is to do what the prop armorer tells him to do. And we did not have a problem. I mean, I understand there was an accidental discharge at one point on the set of a blank round, but we did not have a problem for me until that day.
So the responsibility of the actor is to just do what he's told. Even if that means pointing a real gun, what he knows to be a real gun, at another human being on the word of somebody else without personally verifying that there's no live rounds in the gun. Not according to the Screen Actors Guild.
There's only,
by the way, now moving forward, we know that if you point a gun at someone and don't make sure there's no live rounds in the gun, you could kill them. I'm pretty sure we knew that risk before this, Alec Baldwin.
one question to be resolved, only one. And that is, where did the live round come from?
That's the question he likes to focus on. Where did the live round come from? And it's a good question. We should answer that question. It's not particularly relevant to his liability, his criminal liability for pointing a gun at another human being without making sure there were no live rounds in the gun. He knows it's a real gun. He knows it's capable of holding live rounds and firing them. And he pointed it and shot Helena Hutchins through the chest, side to side.
The particulars of what happened, the particulars, most importantly, of how a piece of live ammunition ended up on this property. It wasn't supposed to be on the property. It wasn't supposed to be on the truck. It wasn't supposed to be in the kit. It wasn't supposed to be in somebody's fanny pack. A live round.
It wasn't supposed to be, but there's no magic force field around the set that prevents a live round from showing up.
Not supposed to be anywhere near the set.
How did a real bullet get on that set?
What I'm saying is that's for a criminal investigation to solve. I have no idea. I have no idea. I take that back. I have some ideas, but that's not for me to say. I've spoken to.
It's funny because this question, how did the bullet get on set, really does require a criminal investigation, because there's a variety of ways it could be done. It's ambiguous. Even now, there's alternative theories for how the bullet got on set. The state is saying Hannah Gutierrez brought it on set from her father's house in California. The defense is saying, no, Seth Kenney, who ran the props company, PDQ Props, and supplied dummies and blanks and firearms to the set, he had live rounds in his place too. Now, they happen to be live rounds that originally came from Thel Reed, Hannah Gutierrez's father, but Thel, Reed, and Seth Kenney had worked together on a live fire training just a short while before this incident. And some of those live rounds from Thel Reed had found their way back to Seth Kenney's warehouse, where he also stored his dummy rounds and his blank rounds.
To the sheriff's department multiple times. I don't have anything to hide, you know.
Oh, so the point I was going to make is that is a question, and it is ambiguous, and it does require an investigation. You know what doesn't really require an investigation? His pointing a gun at Helena Hutchins and shooting her. That's unambiguous. There's no question that that's what happened.
You're not worried about being charged.
I've been told by people who are in the know in terms of even inside the state that it's highly unlikely I would be charged with anything criminally.
All right. So, of course, I've mentioned this before. I have a lot of coverage I've done of this Baldwin fiasco. It's open to the public. You can find it on, let me pull up the little shortcut URL here. lawofselfdefense.com/Baldwin. And I can tell you, so the shooting was October 21st. This interview is in early December. I did a blog post on October 22nd, the day after the shooting, when the facts were still unclear. You know, it could have been a genuine accident. But very quickly, the facts became clearer. And by, let's see when the first time I referenced manslaughter. By October 25th, 4 days later, I was giving interviews saying, if he's charged, he'll be convicted, because this is manslaughter every day of the week and twice on Sunday. You point what you know to be a real gun at another human being without making sure there's no live rounds in it, and you kill them, that's involuntary manslaughter. So I don't know who he's talking to, but he wasn't talking to me.
Is it? I don't sound like I'm the victim.
Darn it.
She and I had this thing in common where we both thought it was empty, and photography who's instructing you
Gun.
pointed.
Some who say you're never supposed
Well, but no, sometimes they wouldn't demonstrate to me. Some insisted
The
All right,
armor,
folks.
when you're done, you do it again.
Right.
on me to say that it's safe. When that's a tough question, because the actor's responsibility going this me until that day.
Sorry, folks.
There's only one question to be resolved, only one. And that is, where did the live round come from?
My apologies. I hit the timeline
The
by accident.
particulars of what happened. The particulars, most importantly, of how a piece of live ammunition ended up on this property. It wasn't supposed to be on the property. It wasn't supposed to be on the truck. It wasn't supposed to be in the kit. It wasn't supposed to be in somebody's fanny pack. A live round is not something criminally.
Finally caught up.
In the aftermath of the shooting, authorities are investigating how live rounds made it onto the New Mexico set. Earlier this week, a search warrant was executed at an Albuquerque prop house owned by Seth Kenny, who told detectives he was hired to supply Russ with guns, as well as dummy rounds and blanks.
PDQ Arm and Prop supplied the guns, the blank ammunition, and 50 dummy rounds to the show.
Kenny, who asked for his face not to be shown, says he wasn't the film's only provider.
It's not a possibility that they came from
He was hired to supply
this
Russ
is a
with guns, as
good
well as dummy
opportunity to look at
rounds
the
and
single
blanks.
action revolver.
PDQ Arm and Prop supplied the guns, the blank ammunition, and 50 dummy rounds to the show.
Kenny, who asked for his face not
So that's how you load the single action revolver. You'll see there's a little, can you see my little pointer there? There's the loading gate. It's swung open on the rear of the cylinder, and that exposes the chambers in the cylinder so you can put rounds in, take rounds out. If you open up that loading gate and you pull the hammer to the half cock notch, this cylinder will just spin freely. And it's very easy looking through the back of the loading gate through the empty cylinder to determine that there's nothing in those cylinders at all. It takes seconds.
to be shown, says he wasn't the film's only provider.
It's not a possibility that they came from PDQ or from myself personally. When we send dummy rounds out, they get individually rattle tested before they get sent out. So if you have a box of 50, you've got to do it 50 times. And then at that point, you know they're safe to send.
So it literally is possible that live rounds came from him, because when the search warrant was executed, they found live rounds in his facility where he stored his blanks, his dummy rounds, his guns, and it was disheveled as F, disorganized, confused, and there were boxes of live rounds in there, the live rounds that he'd acquired from Thel Reed, Hannah Gutierrez's father.
Baldwin says he places trust in Hannah Gutierrez Reed. According to that search warrant, the young armorer told investigators she loaded 5 dummy rounds into Baldwin's gun before lunch and a 6th after, when the gun was retrieved from a safe. Gutierrez Reed's attorney has said she has no idea where the live rounds came from. He raised the possibility that someone may have deliberately mixed live rounds in a box of dummies in an act of sabotage.
I don't know. But even if someone had done that, no harm would have resulted had Adam Baldwin either not pointed his gun directly at Helena Hutchins, or, if he was going to insist on doing that, had personally ensured that the gun in his hand did not have live rounds in it. He was the last chain in that cascade of failure. He was the last person that could ensure that Helena Hutchins was not shot by the gun in his hand. And he failed that. Did I say Adam? Alec, sorry.
That's a big swing. That's an enormous charge to make, that someone came and did something. For what purpose? To attack who? To discredit who? To harm me, the production? I mean, that means motive and opportunity. You know, what was their motive in doing that if somebody did that? It's overwhelmingly likely that it was an accident.
Yeah, the bullet being on set probably was an accident. I don't think it was deliberate sabotage. Meaning an accident in the sense that it was unintentional. Again, bullets are inherently hazardous instruments too. So you don't get a break just because the risk you created was unintentional. If it was negligent or reckless, you're still liable civilly and or criminally, respectively.
According to a search warrant, Assistant Director David Halls, seen in this IMDb photo, told investigators Gutierrez Reed opened the firearm used by Baldwin, but Halls could only remember seeing 3 rounds, and that he should have checked all of them but didn't, and couldn't recall if Gutierrez Reed spun the drum.
So obviously he didn't check them all because there was a live round in the gun. And he didn't check thoroughly.
Halls also told investigators he didn't know there were any live rounds in the firearm. But his attorney has said it wasn't Hall's responsibility to confirm whether the gun was loaded.
It's everybody's responsibility. Everybody's responsibility.
Somebody brought live rounds, plural, onto the set of the film. And one of them ended up in that gun. And if the bullets didn't come on the property, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
So I've talked before about the likelihood that, or the possibility that Hannah Gutierrez could raise as part of her legal defense the argument of intervening cause. An intervening cause is something that happens after whatever your bad act was that made the bad outcome possible, and it was unforeseeable that would happen. So Hannah Gutierrez Reed could say, listen, even if somehow I was responsible for the live ammo coming on the set, or I was responsible for not thoroughly checking the gun just before this event to make sure there was no live ammo in it, even if I am responsible for that, and that created risk, that risk could only be realized if Alec Baldwin points the gun at Helena Hutchins without himself ensuring there's no live ammo in the gun. It's unforeseeable to me that would happen, particularly the pointing of a live gun at someone, because, again, SAG-AFTRA says, refrain from pointing a firearm at anyone. And I had reason to believe that Alec Baldwin, with all his experience, knew this safety mandate and would follow it. So therefore, it was unforeseeable to me that he would point the gun directly at Helena Hutchins. And that's an intervening cause. What Alec Baldwin's trying to argue here is something that does not work in the law, and that is a preceding event, relieving him of liability. Because even if Hannah brought the bullet on the set, all he had to do was check to make sure the round was not in the gun, which he could do in seconds. The fact that she did something bad before, I mean, you might as well argue that, well, if the factory had never made the bullet, this would never happen. So what? You were the last step in the chain. What they're responsible for, they have responsibility. Hannah does, and David Halls does. Everybody but him. Amazing. I love that line, Russian roulette, because it really was Russian roulette, right? Unless you personally determine there's no live rounds in the gun or have the armorer demonstrate that to you in your presence, the moment before the gun's put in your hand, you literally do not know whether or not there's a live round in the gun. And you are playing Russian roulette every time you point that gun at another human being. Again, if the script had called for Alec Baldwin to point the muzzle to his own head, you think he would have had a check to make sure there was no live ammo in it in his presence? Oh, darn it.
No comment. One of those two.
Okay.
Investigators Gutierrez Reed opened the firearm used by Baldwin, but Halls could only remember seeing 3 rounds, and that he should have checked all of them but didn't.
Live rounds.
All right. Sorry, folks. I think I'm back at the right place.
Somebody brought live rounds, plural, onto the set of the film. and one of them ended up in that gun. And if the bullets didn't come on the property, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Now, at the same time, I don't want to see Hannah suffer and Halls suffer and all these people suffer the agony of having to face what they're responsible for, what they did.
So that's where I made the remark that everyone else is responsible for what they did. But Alec Baldwin's not responsible for what he did.
The second civil suit from script supervisor Mamie Mitchell also alleged there were warning signs of the dangerous conditions that existed on set.
The attorneys for script supervisor Mamie Mitchell, who filed one of the suits, said Mr. Baldwin chose to play Russian roulette when he fired a gun without checking it and without having the armorer do so in his presence. His behavior and that of the producers on Rust was reckless. How do you respond?
There are two people that filed civil suits so far. And one of them walked up to me outside the church, probably within 15 or 20 minutes of the event itself, and put their hand on me and said, "You realize that you have no responsibility for what's happened here, don't you?"
Was this Serge?
No comment. One of those two. And now that person is suing me. Now, again, they're entitled.
Well, first of all, that person was a member of the crew. They're not a lawyer. They're not qualified to determine whether you have any responsibility, any liability here. Second of all, 15 minutes after the event, they don't have full information on what happened. For all they know, a piece of the set fell on you, knocked the gun out of your hand, and it discharged when it struck the ground. Then you might not have any liability. But maybe he learned that, in fact, the gun was in your hand and you pointed it intentionally directly at Helena Hutchins.
Entitled to change their mind. More importantly, they're entitled to sit down with a lawyer who will convince them to change their mind.
The damn lawyers.
Serge Svetnick told ABC News that he did tell Baldwin what happened that day wasn't his fault, but now believes differently, and that the actor should have checked the gun.
I concur 100%.
Your emotions are so clearly so right there on the surface. You felt shock. You felt anger. You felt sadness. Do you feel guilt?
No.
So quick with the no. No guilt for having fired the round out of the gun pointed directly at Helena Hutchins that took her life.
I feel that I feel that someone is responsible for what happened, and I can't say who that is, but I know it's not me.
No one is more responsible than the man holding the gun, pointing it at Helena Hutchins when it fires the bullet that kills her.
I mean, I honest to God, if I felt that I was responsible, I might have killed myself if I thought I was responsible. I don't
The ego protection is just unbelievable.
say that lightly. What do we come out of this learning? What do we
Don't point guns at people without making sure there are no live rounds in it? Didn't we know that before?
come out of it? What changes can be made? Because where you have a person where, as I said, this is 1 in a billion, that someone puts a real bullet in the gun. That never happens. And you
know what happens? Someone points a gun at another human being without ensuring personally that there's no live rounds in it.
idea that a real bullet was in that gun and would come out of that gun and kill that woman, that was not even in the realm of possibility.
It was, in fact, in the realm of possibility because it happened.
And that's the thing that they must find out, is who brought bullets onto the set.
The one question for him. Is that it? All right. That's everything I have. That's all the interview I was going to cover here today. So that's it, folks. Hour and 13 minutes in. That's all I wanted to do for this Sunday. Tomorrow morning, Monday, starting at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time, I will be again live streaming the trial of Hannah Gutierrez down in New Mexico on her own manslaughter charges and evidence tampering charges all day. I'll be doing it all day. I'll send out an email to those of you on the email list and put a notification on Twitter. And I hope a bunch of you decide to join me. It should be fun. And I think I'll have some special content to cover during the lunch break. I've mentioned that the parties in court seem to be very cordial with each other, but some of the motions they exchanged back and forth pre-trial are pretty darn snarky. So maybe I'll read through one or two of those during the lunch break tomorrow. In any case, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, I'll be live streaming again on Hannah Gutierrez, and I look forward to seeing a bunch of you there. Until then, remember, if you carry a gun so you're hard to kill, carry a knife, carry pepper spray, study jujitsu so you're hard to kill, so your family is hard to kill. That's why I do all those things. Then you also owe it to your friends, to yourself and your family to make sure you know the law so you're hard to convict as well. Until tomorrow morning, have a great evening, everybody.